Yeah, hello everybody, and welcome back to my Legacy podcast. Today I have the privilege, I would say the honor, to talk to Lisa Kristine. You're sitting somewhere, I guess, in California. We have agreed on a schedule at in Pacific time, right? So which means that you are located somewhere along this coast. I saw your work for the first time almost 10 years ago when I saw the picture of Kofi, and maybe you can also tell something about Kofi during our interview. So, Lisa, wholehearted welcome to you, and thank you very much for taking your time. Could you introduce yourself quickly to all the listeners and to the audience, which does not know you yet, maybe? Please go ahead.
Oh, well, I'm Lisa Kristine, and I am a humanitarian photographer. Um, Sorry about that. I don't. So
No
sorry.
problem.
Let's start
No,
that
that,
again. I don't. I have to think about how I can. For some reason, I have my silencer on, but the. Can you give me 1 minute? Because I'm worried this
yes,
is going
no
to
problem.
stop.
Just go ahead. Yeah.
1 second. Sorry about that.
No
That was
problem. We can cut it out anyway. So I will edit everything. No problem. Yeah.
okay. I'm Lisa Kristine, and I'm a humanitarian photographer. For the last 30 plus years, I've been documenting humanity around the world in, gosh, more than 150 countries now. And I've done so with really this notion of inspiring unity and dignity. I've always believed that it's in our differences that we are one. And that's my driving purpose with my work, is to invite people into a space wherein they can view another human being in a photograph where it's permissible to stare at someone who maybe looks very different than ourselves. And I think that allowance to really look at a photograph without imposing upon a person allows for a lot of transformation to happen inside of us. Um, that's been the main aim of my work. And then I also do work around, well, missions that are near my heart, one being modern day slavery, which has been occurring for obviously a very, very long time, but which sadly remains not really dealt with. I mean, there's more than 49.6 now, I think the number is 49.6 million people who are enslaved in the world today. And I have dedicated a lot of my time documenting on the front lines of modern day slavery around the world with the same notion, really, as my other work being that, no matter how challenging the situation is that people are forced to be in, whether it's laboring in illegal gold mines or working in a brothel or a carpet factory, whatever it is, no matter how horrible the situation is, what's interesting for me to photograph is that person's dignity. So I feel like all the work is really about elevating the best of who we are and perhaps the best at who we can become, and hoping that sort of connection allows for more connection and less ability to treat each other with harm. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Lisa, tell me, before we dive into this very interesting and crucial mission from my point of view, how did you start your career? I mean, how did you find the journey towards photography? How did you find your passion or purpose, or whatever we call it, how did it start, and when did it start? Where did it start? Tell me.
Well, it's interesting really, because I was the kid that had a pretty chaotic and challenging childhood. And I remember my mom had this bookshelf in our house, of course, and it was full of these anthropology books. And I took a great deal of solace in pulling out these volumes of books and opening up pages, and seeing people so covered with feathers and mud that they resembled the earth itself. And I think from my point of view as a young person who was somewhat troubled, they appeared to me totally unshakable. Like they just looked like they were part of the earth and nothing was going to blow them over. Wherein myself, I felt more vulnerable. And I even remember, going out to the middle of our street when I was a kid and declaring that when I was old enough, I was going to get out of here and I was going to go find these people and learn what it was that they had in their own lives so I could impart it in mine. Now, that didn't have to do with photography or anything at a young age. And I was a kid who was very drawn to the arts. I loved to draw, and I loved to write poetry, and I loved to play music. And when I was 11, my aunt and uncle, who actually ended up raising me from the time I was about 7, gave me my first camera. And it was this little Olympus OMG. And I remember using it to make photographs of my surroundings, which in my case was my family and my friends. And I would make photographs of them, but not in the typical, smile kind of way, but rather something pensive, or, I was always interested in someone's sense of infinity, their sense of depth. And when I look back on them, they're not great photographs technically, but they were my beginning. And I actually went on to study fashion design and merchandising at the Fashion Institute in San Francisco. And when I finished that course, I thought, wow, that was really great, but it's not for me. And I had purchased a ticket to go elsewhere. And like anyone who travels, we bring along a camera. I had I had a mentor, Ted Lawfer, who taught me how to print Cibachrome, which is a silver dye bleach process. So along with my learning about photography, when I went out into the world and made images, and eventually came back after 5 years, I call it really my true university, the university of life, to travel to all these different places. But when I returned, I shared my work with friends and family, and there was a response to it, which happened to be very favorable. And pretty shortly after that, I was hired by this, little photo agency who paid me to do my work. And I remember being in Peru at one point and thinking, my gosh, somebody's going to pay me to do this. Like, I would do this for free, right? I would totally have done it. In any case, I wasn't with them very long, that agency, but I was pretty astonished that people were drawn into purchasing the work, and it evolved from there. And that is how really I survived for the most part, is by making images that my client base, which is across the globe, purchase. And then it allows me to continue on with making my work, which is on unity around the world, as well as funding my projects that I do, on modern day slavery, where, obviously I risk my life to do it, but it's, to me, so important that the topic is understood.
Mm-hmm. So there are so many people out there, who say, okay, I discovered my purpose, I discovered my true calling. And sometimes it's very difficult for these people to change their career, at the age of 50 maybe, or at the age of 40, already they say, oh, I'm too old to change anything in my life, They always keep on saying, no, it's not too late. It's never too late to follow your true passion. But many people are scared of not making money, of not making a living, especially when they are moving into the arts area, Mm-hmm. So what would you tell such people, for example, just follow your passion, or what is there a golden rule you followed in order not just to survive, but also to have a decent life, to live a decent life and make a living. What would you tell such people, to develop sort of a courage, or to dare to do it?
Well, the beauty about courage, really, and bravery is that you have to be afraid in order to have courage to move forward. So, I guess part of it is really inviting in that fear, and being friends with it, and knowing that if you want to transform something in yourself, or if I want to transform something in myself, I have to be willing to go through that a friendly conversation with fear, and move forward anyway. So I have I guess a belief that, to me, what's most important in my life is the gratitude I have when I wake up in the morning, and the footprint I leave behind, and how what I'm doing in my day, it matters to me, that it matters to me. And so money, although I feel fortunate to make a earning as an artist and a photographer, like, it's so wonderful and brilliant, it's not the driving force for me. The driving
Mm,
force is purpose. And there's that old saying that do what you love and the money shall follow. And uh, I feel that that's a fortunate, wonderful thing that I'd like to think is true, and I feel fortunate about it. But the most important element to me is to be in one's purpose.
mm. Okay, absolutely great. So let's dive into this topic of, yeah, modern slavery. Just yesterday, for the second or even third time, I was watching your TED talk. Very impressive. Was it a very impressive pictures for sure. How did you arrive at the, not conclusion, but at the idea or whatever, to follow such a purpose, to dive into a typical businessman or woman would say, okay, it's a niche, sort of, but it's not just a niche, it's a purpose, it's a true life mission, and you dedicate so much energy and also time to it. From what I've seen, from what I've read about you, how did this happen? Was that clear from the very beginning at the age of 20, 25, or when did it start, Lisa?
Well, actually, I've only been in that space of documenting slavery for about, it must be like 15 years or so. And here's the thing is, prior to that, I've been, basically since I'm 18, out photographing humanity, and that's become my life's work. So my career was well on its way. And it was really about unity. And at some point, I had been asked to be the exhibitor at the World Peace Summit, which was in Vancouver, and it was hosted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other Nobel laureates. So while I was there exhibiting my work, I was approached by a woman named Bryn Friedman, who was a supporter of an organization called Free the Slaves here in the States. And that's an organization that fights slavery. And she started really, she asked me, have you ever thought about photographing slavery? And I was like, what are you talking about? You know? And and so she started telling me about it, and I started listening and learning, because I really didn't know. I knew there was some element of trafficking, which I very clearly assumed was sex trafficking, and I thought was in a very small amount of numbers, like very few people, thousands maybe. But when I learned that there were some 27 million people enslaved at that time, now the number is 49.6, I was completely taken aback. I mean, I had no idea. And it was so disturbing to me. I was restless after that, and I couldn't sleep, and I was agitated. And well, I think within a week, I flew down to Los Angeles, and I met with one of the founders, Peggy Callahan. Um, and I met with Bryn, and I had this idea. And the idea was really based on seeing is believing, right? A photograph, when they say it's worth more than 1,000 words, well, I truly believe it is. And I had this idea that if I could go out and photograph these people in their space of being forced to do some things that are just so horrible or labor intensive with no breaks, it's just so dire. I thought if I could photograph them in their dignity and in their soulfulness, that a viewer at a later date who was able to stand before that image would feel again connected to that person and want to do something. And honestly, it proved to be really true. I feel that those photographs have made a real dent in raising awareness around modern day slavery in our world. And that's kind of how I arrived to that space.
Mm.
So interestingly, like I went to so many countries that I had been to before, right? Like I revisited places, including my own backyard in the States. But at this time I would see it from such a different viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, life offered you sort of the opportunity to check this field out and to develop this mission for you, by just meeting the right people. Let's put it that way, maybe, So, Lisa, tell me, you've visited so many countries in the world, most probably almost all countries from what I've heard, 150 countries. We have, I guess, around 190, 200 countries. In which countries did you face the worst situation in terms of human slavery? I mean, I listened very carefully to your TED Talk, and then when you mentioned that even in the US, and I guess even here in Europe or Switzerland, we face this issue, but nobody's aware of it. That's the crazy thing. But can you describe a little bit or tell us in what countries do we see the worst situation in terms of this human slavery?
Well, I think the remarkable thing is that slavery is illegal pretty much everywhere, but the truth is it occurs pretty much everywhere. So one of the issues that we face with modern day slavery and human trafficking is that it hides frequently in plain sight. So even here in California, or perhaps where you live, there could be the waiter serving you food. It could be someone in a gas station. It could be someone working on a farm somewhere. It could certainly be, sex trafficking is everywhere, and that's rampant too. But where I think slavery is the worst, I think it's pretty bad everywhere. And I also think in some countries it's a little bit. It happens more frequently, but that's usually due to a population. So like in India, there's a great deal of slavery, but it also is a very highly populated places and there's a lot of poverty. Whenever we have poverty, we have vulnerability and exploitation. And one of the other feeders into slavery presently is the whole mass migration of people fleeing either, political asylum or fleeing war or an environmental turmoil with these crazy global warming. And whenever you have people that are on the move, they're, even if they collectively travel as a family, they're carrying everything they own on their backs, and they often get lost from one another, and there's a form of chaos around migration. And those people are extremely vulnerable to being picked up by traffickers, because traffickers are very, very smart, very organized, and very cunning. And they make a lot of false promises, like, I can get you this great job, I can get you an education. And then the minute, they're in the fold, they've lost control of their lives. So it occurs everywhere. And that's what matters. And in fact, to your point about it being where you live as well, when I first came out with a body of work, I didn't have any work from the West at that time. And so many people, I would go to universities all over and talk about slavery. And of course, I did my TED Talk, but a lot of Americans were saying, well, oh, that happens in those other countries. And it started to really infuriate me. And I did my first project in the United States in Washington, D.C. at the foot of the embassies, where I documented sex trafficking. And it's so important that we all understand that it happens everywhere and it needs to end everywhere. We need to figure it out.
Okay. I can imagine that sometimes, I saw your pictures, when you were climbing down these huge shafts, 300 meters deep, I guess. I don't remember where it was, And I can imagine that sometimes you face also quite tricky, very dangerous situations, you know. And I mean, you're raising the awareness by taking pictures, by documenting these things and stuff like that. Did you face any barriers during your work? I mean, barriers in terms of dangerous situations where entrepreneurs or people who exploit these other people, you know, who promote slavery, where they threatened you maybe, or I mean, or has that always been an easy game to a certain extent?
Uh, well, the thing with documenting slavery is they don't put out the red carpet for you, right? You are not welcome there. And how I worked was with partners around the world who were abolitionists that were helping. So if I was in Ghana working in illegal gold mines, I was with abolitionists that work in that very intimate environment in those gold mines, but they're all working undercover. And so they would bring me in for very small periods of time, like, most of that work, which is done all over the world, but which also um, shares and shows different forms of forced labor, whether it's gold mining or brick making or agriculture or carpet weaving or sex trafficking. Um, that body of work, for the most part, was made in very small windows of time, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because of the lack of safety. And I had to be brought in by these abolitionists when the traffickers themselves weren't there, when the managers had stepped away. And it was dangerous. It was scary a lot of the time. And I would just keep thinking to myself, do it for them, because I couldn't believe that it existed. And I knew that if people saw that it existed, they would do something. I just knew it. And that's what drove me past my fear.
Okay. What was the, I mean, you've seen so many, yeah, impressive things, I guess, you know. Can you tell us something about Kofi, this picture, which inspired me so much also to think about myself, about life, about the world, how it really works out there, about this, I don't know how old this boy was at this time, I guess 4 or 5 years young, most probably, I don't know. Can you tell something about this impressive picture? I mean, when people Google, you know, they will find it, Kofi. Also together with you, I saw you on a picture and behind the picture of Kofi. It's just great. Can you tell something about Kofi?
Sure. Well, Kofi was a small young boy who was trafficked and sold to fishing villages. Lake Volta in Ghana is the largest man-made lake in the world, and it's also a place where there's a tremendous amount of child trafficking for the fishing villages, and they love kids because their fingers are so small and nimble, and they're able to, tether up the nets and untie knots and pull out debris. And I made that particular image of young Kofi at a safe house. He had recently been rescued from the village, and the kids there have to learn how to be kids again. They have to learn how to play, how to laugh and have fun, because they have been so traumatized. And that photograph, which is a black and white photograph, and you see this young, beautiful boy with water droplets all over him. And the reason for that is because he was bathing at a well, and he was, in his little shorts, and he was pulling up these huge buckets of water and dumping it over his head. It was really sweet. But the beautiful thing about making that image was that some months later, after I'd returned home, I got news that they had actually located his parents, which is amazing because it's hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And the activists on the ground do tremendous work. But I often think, when I look at Kofi, who will this kid become because someone took a stand for him? That's the thing in life. When we're willing to stand for another, that's a beautiful thing. And it's an opportunity on both sides, I think. But I love that image. And it's a kind of emblem of a global exhibition I have called Bound to Freedom. And that particular image of Kofi is actually called Freedom. And luminaries all over the world have that image. And the proceeds from it actually go to fighting slavery, the proceeds from that body of work. So it's really neat. It's really special.
Absolutely great, impressive, inspiring. Very, I mean, it touches my heart still, you know. And getting back to this topic, when it comes to freeing slaves, do we all, I mean, normal human beings here who are most probably not even aware of this tragedy, let's call it that way, do we have an option, an opportunity to make a real contribution in order to help to free slaves? I mean, what can I, as Andreas, do, for example, in order to support your work, or in order to support works of other, there are maybe NGOs and other foundations and organizations who try to make a real contribution in this area in terms of trying at least to free slavery. Is it possible at all? And if yes, can we make a contribution? Can we support that? Or what are you
Well,
saying?
I believe we can all do something. We all participate in slavery every day, unknowingly or knowingly. I mean, my iPhone is slavery right there, and probably some element of my clothes, whether it's somebody that was sewing it, that would be more obvious, but it could be that those people that are sewing it are in a building that was made by bricks from an illegal brick kiln where slaves made the bricks. So slavery is in our supply chains, and we can begin to ask our grocery stores, where's that fish coming from? I want to know where it's coming from, and if there's any slavery in the supply chain. And the more pressure we could put on merchants, well, believe me, that's the fastest turnaround. But we can also write letters to our political leaders in our communities to put more emphasis on fighting human trafficking and slavery in our own country or community. One can volunteer at an organization. I can guarantee you there are organizations probably around you too that are fighting human trafficking and slavery. Can also donate money to organizations that are doing fine work to help fight slavery. So I feel like there's so much that can be done. Like, people that are attorneys can dedicate some of their time to helping people who had been trafficked to fight their own battles. They have no money. They're not represented. I mean, they don't have bank accounts. They've lost all their abilities. Anyone can help. And I think that that's so important to recognize.
Okay, so just to raise the awareness and also to get informed about all these facts and about what really happens in all the countries. I think most of the people, they do not even know that such things do happen. I think that's already very, very important. When I saw your pictures, and I followed your journey and all these things, I was thinking you must have experienced quite severe situations, and I mean, you must have seen really, how shall I put it, shocking things in life. How do you digest such things, Lisa? Is it just I mean, do you have sleepless nights, or I mean, what are you doing when you are located in such countries and you see these people, and that must be sometimes very heartbreaking for sure when you see it live. How do you cope with such things?
Well, the truth is, when you're documenting modern day slavery and human trafficking, it is really heart-wrenching. It's really sad to see people work so hard and just dire situations. And it does get overwhelming. But one thing is that by me doing something, I sleep better, because I know that it's existing and that I'm acknowledging that it exists, and that I am trying to do something to help the situation. And the other thing is, back to my greater body of work, which is about documenting unity and dignity, and going to these, very old ancient tribes where they live very close to the earth, and sitting at the foot of an elder, where I'm reminded of the beauty of the world. And that to me is how I balance things, because where there is great disparity and of course there's these enormous atrocities, there's also beauty that we need to remember exists too. And I find that with balancing that out, it's helpful. I'm also a member of an organization called GSN, which is Global Sustainability Network. And we are a band that originally formed at the Vatican in 2016, a group of faith leaders and business and government and NGOs and people who really want to get involved in ending this atrocity of modern day slavery and human trafficking. And we come together all over the world. So anyone that wants to visit that, that's gsngoal8.org, I think. And I have a foundation as well called Human Thread, where we promote human dignity through fighting trafficking and really elevating the idea that this is existing so that we could make change. I think all of these things are ways for me that are very helpful to keep me going forward and having a form of purposefulness, but with actual impact.
Great, absolutely great. So I have a last question. I'm always try to keep it to 30 minutes, something like that, so a little bit shorter, but then I also make sure that the people really listen to this podcast, which is always very interesting, and for sure this one especially. My last question to you, Lisa, your next plans, have you planned any journeys? And another question on top of that, your vision for your personal vision for humanity, for this planet,
Well, this last year I've been full of a tremendous amount of travel. I've been in South Korea speaking at the Nobel Peace Summit on, storytelling visually to help with peace and changing our societies, and like ending slavery and creating peace, and in Dubai for meetings and speaking, and London as well, and in India working with Kailash Satyarthi, the Nobel laureate. He has a amazing orphanage or ashram called Bal Ashram, where traumatized kids that have been trafficked are cared for. I mean, he's rescued more than 100,000 children from child labor and trafficking. He's an amazing man. So he's doing some photographic work there. And as far as things coming up, I'm sort of brewing what will be next. I have to go back to London, and I have a lot of, I do a lot of speaking around advocacy of slavery too. But I'm hoping to go to Brazil, actually, to an island called Xingu, to do some work there. And I'm kind of planning that out at the moment. It's always wondrous to see what comes down the pipeline,
Okay. And what is your big vision, which is still to be performed over the next, let's put it that way, 30, 35, 40 years? What's your dream for the so-called perfect world from your point of view, Lisa?
Well, my vision for the perfect world is that we all remember that we are brothers and sisters, no matter where we live, and that all of us, despite the luck of where we're born or the luck of privilege, all of this, that we help one another. And lastly, that we have a world that is much more free from this dire exploitation of our brothers and sisters around the world for greed and gain, very specifically to end slavery and human trafficking, to have it be enormously less than it is now.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much for your openness and for your inspiring words. I appreciate very much also, given your busy schedule and all your meetings and obligations you have maybe, but I appreciate very, very much. Thank you very much for your words. And I hope that I meet you one day somewhere on this planet, face to face, maybe in India, maybe in Bhutan, maybe somewhere else.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.